Hello, viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today, I'm pleased to present you with another installment in my deck deconstruction series. Though it's not exactly my strong point, the goal of this series is to remain brief and concise. So, in the interest of creating these episodes quickly, I'll be keeping visual editing minimal. So, while you're watching these videos and assessing guests' decks, consider their reasoning and logic behind each and every card inclusion, and do all of your fellow viewers a favor in leaving a comment stating both what you agree with and what you'd run differently. So, in a sense, hopefully each and every one of these episodes can become a discussion piece and living deck list. If you enjoy this video or like the premise of this series, remember to hit that like button, ensure you're subscribed, and you're encouraged to share, because as ever, the more engagement this content receives, the more viewers are reached, and ever the broader you help grow our Conquest community. But with our introduction aside, let's get things started with an exceptionally formidable deck list, this time for our second Astra Militarum faction warlord, Torquemada Coteaz. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before you share your formidable Astra Militarum deck list, why don't you introduce yourself and share a little bit about how you're involved in the Conquest community?
Well, I'm Florian, first and foremost, and some of you may know me as Living End, others may know me as Geomaster. I do a lot of trolling, to be honest, and my main involvement with the game is actually playing on Octagon. I live in Germany, and in Germany there aren't very many metas, so playing in real life is kind of tough, and so mostly what I do is playing on Octagon, and I beat Kingsley once. Yay.
Well, that's one more time than I have under my belt.
I honestly don't do a whole lot in the community for Conquest. This is actually the first constructive thing I've done, hosting a deck list about Coteaz.
Oh, no worries.
My competitive history of gaming is mainly focused around Game of Thrones First Edition.
Sure.
I've played in 3 European Championships so far. Didn't make the cut in either of them, but I still like to tell me from time to time that I'm a good player, you know?
Right.
To keep the spirit up. And I saw Conquest when it was first released, and it was at a time where I bought everything from FFG that came out. So I joined in, and I had a lot of fun. And the only real competitive Conquest experience I have is one regional, I think, and I went 6-0 in the Swiss of the Nationals, but then I had to leave. So that's basically my competitive Conquest experience.
Right.
And you see, that's not a whole lot.
Sure, but you're definitely a player among, all of us in the Skype group that's very highly esteemed and kind of well-regarded and respected. And considering just some of the, monumental skill levels present in that group, I think it's saying a lot just that you've managed to command so much respect, even without some enormous competitive history. I suppose when it comes to this Coteaz deck in particular, what kind of experience and success have you seen playing the deck list that you've brought today?
Wow, this sounds a little bit douchey right now, but I think I'm like 6-0 with it right now.
Okay.
And it's really good, and I would love for someone like Kingsley to bring it to Worlds, because I think he could win Worlds with this deck. Shout out to Kingsley. Build the deck and play it.
It seems like there's a theme in this video so far, but I definitely appreciate your bringing on a strong deck, especially for one of the warlords that doesn't quite see as much competitive glory as someone like Kith or Ragnar or Kato. I suppose, all in all, what kind of player would enjoy using a deck like Coteaz?
I think more of an advanced player. That, again, sounding kind of douchey here, but and arrogant. But the real the thing is, the deck has a lot of triggers and small interactions you have to remember, and there's just a lot going on. And I think you have to really have a solid base game in Conquest to really start playing this deck, because you have to remember a lot of stuff, so you can't really struggle with the basics to really get it going.
Well, definitely makes sense to me. I suppose as a whole, like, what is the premise of this deck? What does it do if everything is operating as intended?
It kind of does everything. That's the cool thing about it. You have a lot of command. You will win the command battle against almost any other deck. You have a lot of low drops, which means one drop capping units. So your starting hands are going to be quite good, and you're going to have the potential to snowball very quickly. And then but you also have raw power. You have Coteaz, who can hit for 3, 4, 6 strength and can just destroy enemy elite units or enemy warlords wherever he shows up. And then you have the tactical squad Cardinis, which is very potent against swarmy enemies. And it's this package where you have an answer to everything that I feel makes this particular build very strong.
Sure. I mean, I could see that performing really well in a tournament, just if you have an answer to pretty much any comer, any deck that you might happen to be running up against. I suppose just taking a look at the entire deck as a whole, it's of course 50 cards, 30 of which are army units. You have 4 total attachments, 11 events, and 5 supports. In taking a look at a card-by-card basis, Torquemada Coteaz himself, he's a 0/8, he's got a combat action, sacrifice a unit at his planet to give him +3 attack. For his next attack, limit once per attack. How exactly are you using him as a unit? Like, where do you commit him? How do you have him fight? How do you snipe command?
So I think I want to start off with the weaknesses that Coteaz has.
Sure.
First, the obvious weakness of him is that he has 0 attack. You cannot commit him to a planet without a unit, because then he'll just don't do anything and lose the battle, presumably. So that's the biggest downside to him. And this deck is kind of built around that fact and tries to mitigate that to a degree. Because usually you can't go to a planet with him and snipe command, for example, because it won't do anything, because he doesn't have attack.
Right.
And even if you have a unit nearby, you're still basically trading your Void Pirate or something for their capping unit at the same planet. That's not a very good trade. So he's mainly a fighting warlord. Even with the mitigating factors in the deck, you can't change that he's a fighting warlord. He wants to be at planet 1 and he wants to bash face. And that's mostly what he does. Bringing him to the first planet is a huge threat. +3 attack will destroy almost everything immediately. And basically, he is this very strong fighting warlord, but with this deck, you can also use him to snipe command here and there. And that's really what I like about him.
Well, definitely. I suppose breaking into our army units, some of the fodder meant to be sacrificed. First, I suppose you've chosen to ally with Space Marines. We have 3 copies of the 10th Company Scout, so 1 cost, 1 command, 2 attack, 1 hit point. What are you typically doing with this unit?
First of all, I want to quickly state something about Space Marine allies.
Sure.
When I first built this deck, it started off as an Orc deck, just like every Astra Militarum deck, basically. And it had 3 thugs, and it had ammo depots, all the jazz. And I played a lot of games with it, and I had a lot of really close games against other top decks like Kith and Space Marines and all.
Sure.
And I started cutting the Orc cards, and Ammo Depot got cut at some point because the resource curve didn't allow for more draw. And then I started cutting the thugs because I already had a lot of 2-drops. And at some point, I only had like 4 Orc cards in it, and at that point I was like, wait a minute, maybe it's better to just play Space Marines because I get a couple of different units that can help me mitigate the problems that Coteaz has. And that's when I arrived at Space Marines. And now to answer your question about 10th Company Stout, I don't want to keep you waiting too long.
Oh, not a problem. I've got nowhere to be.
That's just a dude. Basically, you need a certain amount of low drops for Coteaz to work, because ideally you want to sacrifice a unit that costs 1 to his ability, because that's the minimal resource investment.
Right.
That's also the reason why the deck plays 11 1-drops instead of the standard 9, because it's just way better sacrificing 1-drop. It's 1 resource, 1 card, minimal investment, maximum effect.
Exactly.
And that's why you have 3 10th Company Scouts. And added benefit, they're good with staging ground.
Well, certainly. I suppose there's not really too much to complain about. 1 command, 1 cost unit that can attack reasonably hard. It can be sacrificed. I suppose next we happen to see 4 copies, of course, of the signature army unit, the 2-cost Coteaz's Henchman. It's a 1 command, 1 attack, 3 hit point soldier. Interrupt when this unit leaves play. Ready your Warlord. So when we talk about maximizing value, how do you get the utmost benefit from this unit?
The best use for the Henchman is when Coteaz is under the effect of Preemptive Barrage, because you can hit with Coteaz for 3, sack the Henchman, and hit for another 3 with ranged,
Right.
which is very powerful, obviously. So what you want to do is, obviously for this to work, you need to sacrifice another unit to Coteaz first. So here's where the snowball effect comes into play. If you have a unit at the first planet this turn, and it goes to your HQ, it will come with Coteaz on the next turn and be exhausted.
Right.
So now you have an exhausted unit that isn't doing anything at the planet with Coteaz, and maybe at that planet you also have a henchman. So now you sacrifice the first unit that is exhausted, doesn't do anything, you preemptive barrage Coteaz and the henchman, you attack with the henchman, you attack with Coteaz, now you sacrifice the exhausted henchman standing Coteaz again, and now you can attack with Coteaz again. That's kind of the way I try to maximize the value I get out of the henchmen.
Sure.
Obviously, they're 1/3 unit for 2, which is still pretty good against warlords like Kith mostly, because 1/3 beats a Chimera on its own. So those are the main uses for the henchmen.
Sure, and I mean, before it ultimately comes time to sacrifice it, it could potentially win command or tie command for you. Next, another one of your Space Marine inclusions, we happen to have 3 copies of the ever-popular Eager Recruit. It's 1 cost, 2/1 with Ambush.
I can't overstate how excellent this card is in this deck. This is the card that made me want to play Space Marines, because it does so much for Coteaz. You can deploy it at any time, which is miles better than Elysian Assault Squad.
Right.
I can't stress that enough. Not being bound by anything, you can just play it whenever you want, is so good with Coteaz. And now that's the part where it mitigates Coteaz's weaknesses to some degree. Because now, if you have an Eager Recruit in hand, you can commit to a planet where you don't have a unit. You can commit there, catch your opponent by surprise, deploy an Eager Recruit, attack with the Eager Recruit, and have an attack with Coteaz to boot.
Right.
Which is pretty amazing. And just in general, Eager Recruit is a fantastic combat trick. And small bonus, if you have the Formosan Black Ship, you can deploy an Eager Recruit and basically create an army out of nowhere.
Right. I mean, it just seems like an extraordinarily potent surprise, and if and when there comes a day when we start to see more Astra Militarum or Space Marine ambushing units, this deck only stands to get even more crazy. I suppose anything else to mention about the Eager Recruit before we move on?
Oh yeah, there's a cute little combo. Another problem about Coteaz is that his signature event is... it's not bad, but it's also not amazing. But in combination with the Eager Recruits, it becomes insane, because the Eager Recruits turn his signature event, what's his name again?
The Emperor Protects.
Right, you are. Turns it into another Eager Recruit. And I'd much rather have an Eager Recruit in my hand than an Emperor Protects. And you can also do cute stuff like you're battling it out at the first planet, but your Coteaz is committed to the fourth planet and has an Eager Recruit with him. You can sacrifice that Eager Recruit at Coteaz's planet while the battle at 1 is still raging,
right.
And you can Emperor's Protect the Eager Recruit and now have it available for the first planet. Stuff like that. And there's a lot of, that's what I'm talking about when I say there are a lot of small interactions that you have to consider when you're playing this deck. And it makes for a very fun experience.
Sure, and that's definitely something not all players would necessarily think to do, to, sacrifice a unit even if that attack bonus isn't going to be used, just to free up some additional combat tricks for use later during that same battle. So, very clever combo indeed. I suppose next we happen to have 3 copies of the Interrogator Acolyte. So 3 cost, 1 command, 2 attack, 2 hit points, and when it leaves play, you end up drawing 2 cards.
I like having in-deck draw. I don't really like relying on the planets to give me draw during the game, because sometimes in a tournament, when you play maybe 9 games of Conquest in a row, you're bound to have 1 or 2 games where the planets just don't deliver in the card drawing department. And then it's really important that your deck can sort of support the resources you're getting with outside of planet card draw. And that's basically what the Interrogator Acolyte is in here for.
Sure, and just being able to pick and choose when it ultimately leaves play because of Torquemada has to be pretty convenient too. It makes it more difficult for your opponent to avoid killing it just to deprive you of that effect.
Yeah, especially at low resource planets, this can be a giant pain in the ass for your opponent to deal with if you just drop it at the first planet, because now they have to give you those 2 cards that you will likely be able to play on resource-heavy planets. And they have to make a choice. Is it worth to even commit there and risk the Interrogator Acolyte to die? One thing I should mention is also excellent against Kith, because against Kith, even on medium draw planets, you cannot rely on getting any draw through. So having a unit that draws you cards, good against Kith.
Right, kind of a nice way of breaking through that choke. And I suppose on the topic of economy, next we happen to have 3 copies of the Iron Guard Recruits. They're pretty vanilla, 2 cost, 2 command, 1 attack, 2 hit points. What are you typically doing with these guys?
Winning command struggles.
Definitely makes sense.
And not too few in numbers. Turns out 2 resources and 1 card for 2 command icons is a pretty good deal. And I would recommend you run 3 of them in all your decks that have Astra Militarum in them.
Sure.
And I mean, they're even on double duty in this deck, because once you win a battle at the first planet where they were present, they go to your HQ, and now they can fuel Coteaz.
Right.
And that's one of the things about Coteaz. Normally, the units that come from your HQ in the battle, especially capping units, are completely and entirely useless for the rest of the game, because if you commit to 1 or something with your capping units in your posse, then you won't get anything other than they're just going to die to a random attacking unit or something.
Right.
And now you can just use them to fuel Coteaz, and that turns this downside that you have to use resources every time you attack, actually in an upside, because you're using units that would have been useless anyway otherwise.
Right, and I mean, considering that we see 3 copies of the Cachan Outpost in this deck as well, that's just, yet another little thing that the Iron Guard recruits could potentially do, where just because they're a unit, once you happen to have 1 or more of those supports on the table, they're still reasonably threatening, so...
Yes.
Why not do the whole 2 cost, 2 command thing? But speaking of Cachan Outposts, next we happen to have 3 copies of Rattling Deadeye. So 1 cost, 1 command, 1 attack, 1 hit point, 1 keyword, which happens to be ranged. Where do you typically deploy these?
Usually Iridial. Because you want to get healed, you first have to get through this 3-1 or 5-1 ranged attacker. And that usually means you're getting bloodied before you get healed.
Right.
And other than that, it's just a one-cast dude, which is pretty amazing, as already mentioned.
Yeah, well, it works really nicely with, assisting a preemptive barrage as well, just because it itself is ranged. How often is it with this deck that you are winning through killing the enemy warlord as opposed to through planets?
Not very often, actually, because, well, at a certain level, the people just don't commit to planets where they're getting killed anymore.
Right.
But it's more of the threat of it happening, because when you commit to, they have to contest the first planet, but they can't bring the 2 units that are in HQ and a Warlord there because you would just chew them away. And then it's more of a thing that they always have to retreat their Warlord first in every combat, which gives you a huge advantage. And you may not be able to bloody them, but just the threat of bloodying and killing their Warlord, like, instantly, is enough to just deter them from doing a lot of plays that might actually be necessary for them to win the game.
Sure.
Obviously, sometimes you get to bloody them because it's the last planet that you have to win, and they have to commit there, and they just have to hope that their shields will hold whatever you have, and then you have a preemptive barrage and you just kill them.
Right.
But most of the time, you don't get like crazy Warlord kills turn 2 or something.
Sure. Well, I would imagine not, unless you're playing maybe against a player such as myself. Then I could see that happening. Next, very similar in function to your Iron Guard recruits, you have 3 copies of the Sanctioned Psyker. I imagine I know what you're going to say. It's 2 cost, 0 attack, 2 command, 4 hit points. Anything worth mentioning about this guy?
It's not really all that different from the Iron Guard recruits. The recruits are a little bit better at the first planet because you can get a hit in with them.
Right.
The Sanctioned Psychers are better against opponents who snipe command, like Anchi, for example. And if you have a few outposts on the battlefield, they can take a hit and hit back, which is pretty nice, which the Iron Guard recruits can also, but you usually have to use a shield for that. So they're pretty much the same. They have some slight benefits on each side, but it's not crazy different.
Sure. Well, a much more interesting unit in kind of a nice response to our current metagame, we happen to have 3 copies of the Tactical Squad Cardinis. So 2 cost, 1 command, 1 attack, 3 hit points, area effect 1. How do you typically use this unit? Like, how long do you save it? Where do you deploy it?
I usually deploy it at the planet with 10 Chimera tokens, and I use it to kill all those tokens.
Makes sense. Next card. But no, please go on.
Well, Cardinis is the second reason why I picked Space Marine allies, eventually, because against Kith with Orc allies, you have the problem that they can just commit everything to that one planet they really need and overwhelm you. And the problem with Coteaz is once you're out of gas, your Warlord doesn't do anything anymore. They just have to stall you long enough that your Warlord doesn't have attack anymore. And then you just don't do anything. And this unit prevents them from even thinking about committing to one planet to just overwhelm you there. They can't go all in on that one planet anymore. Even if it's not the first planet, it's just a psychological effect that you cannot do this all-in kind of move anymore. And that's really important.
So, is this the kind of card that you typically hold on to for one of the bigger battles of the game, or hold on to for, like, a critically important planet?
These questions are always tough to answer because
Right.
planet layout and matchup varies so much that you can't really give an catch-all answer to this question. But usually when I have staging grounds out, I try to hold on to a copy because it's so good when they spend their last money and they cannot play, for example, the route, what's its name?
The Archon's Terror?
Exactly. I'm always drawing blanks on names. That's one of my qualities.
No worries. I can't speak German at all if it makes you feel any better.
It also happens to German. I'm terrible at remembering names. When you have a staging ground in play, I think you should hold on to the copy. unless you... It's difficult because they have random discard from your hand, and you have to check if the planet that can also discard a card from your hand, again, I don't know the name because I'm terrible.
Sure, Barless, I think.
Is in play. You have to consider that. Sometimes you just need the command. Sometimes you need to spend 2 for 1 command unit. It's not great, but sometimes it just has to happen because you have to contest the command struggle, or you have to win a certain command struggle in a certain situation.
Sure.
I think most of the time it's just a 1/3 that helps you against swarms and gets rid of all these small units that otherwise might pose a problem to your more at single target damage focused Warlord and strategy.
Well, definitely. It seems like Coteaz is kind of a nice response to some of the hardier, more resilient enemies, and then Tactical Squad can kind of mop up what's left. Something when we were on the topic of value units earlier, we happened to see 3 copies of the Talarn Raiders. They're 1 cost, 1 command, 0 base attack, 2 hit points, and as soon as they're at a planet with a Warlord, they do end up getting a +2 attack. So is this typically a first planet unit, or how do you make the best use of this guy?
I don't think it's a first planet unit unless you are actually unless it's already clear that you have to commit to the first planet.
Okay.
Because if you don't commit your Warlord to the first planet and the opponent doesn't commit to the first planet with their Warlord, then you have an 0-2 at the first planet, which is not great in a fight. So by deploying the Talon Raiders to the first planet, you're either saying your opponent has to commit to the first planet, then it's fine, or you're telegraphing that you want to commit to the first planet. And telegraphing your commitment is dicey, let's put it that way, because then your opponent can take advantage of that information.
Sure.
Most of the time I just put it at planets where I want my opponent to meet resistance when they try to snipe the command there. Like, for example, Iridial. My opponent has 2 hit points left on their Warlord. I put the Talon Raiders there. Now, if they attack with a Warlord there and I shield it, I have a 2-point attacker who can swing back and bloody them. They have to think about that. And it's more of that making the commitment, making the command snipe costly for your opponent thing.
Sure.
Than just going all in. But you can deploy them to the first planet, and they're pretty good in combination with the Preemptive Barrage also. So,
right.
A lot of uses.
Right, and, if nothing else, they're a pretty cheap command icon, and just like you said, they pose a nice little threat of punishing your enemy. I could easily see your opponent, tries to snipe it off, you shield it, or whatever it happens to be, and then you could do some of your eager recruit shenanigans to really punish your opponent's mistakes, so all kinds of fun stuff. I suppose our very last army unit we happen to see is 2 copies of Void Pirate. It's 1 cost, 1 command, 0 attack, 1 hit point. It adds 1 card bonus to whatever planet it's stationed at. I suppose why Void Pirate over Rogue Trader, and why just 2 copies?
Again, the reasoning behind the Void Pirate is that you want in-deck, intrinsic card draw in your deck. Like, that you don't have to rely on the planets so heavily. That's the reason why I want a Void Pirate over Rogue Trader.
Sure.
And then your resource curve is pretty low, actually. You have 11 1-drops, and a lot of events that don't cost a lot, like Preemptive Barrage costs 1, Emperor Protects costs 0, 2 Arms costs 0, and then you have the Formosan Black Ship and the Staging Grounds who cost 1. So your curve is very low, so drawing more cards is preferable to having more resources. And usually you are exactly at the edge where you would take 1 more resource, but you would never take 1 more resource over 1 more card. And that's exactly where you want to end up with your deck. Where drawing an extra card is always better than getting 1 more resource. And the other reason why there are only 2 of the 0-1 cappers with slight benefits in this deck is that it's so much better to commit Coteaz to a planet with a unit that can actually attack than commit him to a planet with a unit that cannot attack by itself.
Right. Because
if you have a Void Pirate at the planet and you commit Coteaz there, now you have to sacrifice your Void Pirate preemptively to even have one attack. If you have a unit there that can attack itself, you can attack with the unit, see if your opponent shields, then decide, do I want to sacrifice my unit? Do I want to keep it around and shield the opponent's attack if they shielded your first attack? And you can you have a lot more wiggle room than with a Void Pirate.
Right. It definitely gives your your deck more opportunity to we've thrown out the term value a million times, but just really maximize your value. If you don't have to sacrifice a unit, then that just, it saves you cards, it saves you resources, and over the course of a game or several games, if you're at a tournament, can end up being just an immense savings.
Yeah. Also, allies are not that great when your opponent is playing the ally route thing, whatever it's called. Salamanders or something.
Oh, the Imperial Fist Siege
Force?
Imperial
Fist Siege Force. Yeah, that thing.
Well, you were close.
Oh, a general thing about the deck is that routes are not as good because you have a lot of low drop units, and those aren't very good targets for Arkan's Terror.
Sure.
Something. And your main fighting unit is Coteaz, who cannot be routed or dealt with in it by anything, really. So, a lot of hate events, a lot of negative attachments just don't really work against the deck, which is a nice bonus.
Definitely. And I mean, it doesn't seem like your opponent's making, well, again, not getting much value out of an Archon's Terror if they're paying 2 resources to route a unit that maybe at most also happens to cost 2 resources. So, all sorts of nasty stuff in this low-cost curve deck. And right along the same lines of exceptionally affordable, inexpensive cards, as we move into your 4 attachments, we see 3 copies of Promotion. So 0 cost, 1 shield icon, the only limited card in this deck, and attached army unit gains 2 command icons. I suppose, how are you typically using this?
Well, I want to start off by saying that 2 resources and 1 card for 2 command icons is pretty good, as we've already established, and 0 resources and 1 card for 2 command icons is even better.
Right.
You can use this for all sorts of things. I think the Ezra said it pretty well when you interviewed him on his nationals list.
Sure.
You can use it for everything. You can use it as a deployment stall, just delaying when you have to really commit to a planet with your big units. Or you can use it after your opponent has already passed to put it on the guy and win a command strike somewhere, force your opponent to either commit there or sacrifice a huge swing in command. It's just a very versatile card. It doesn't cost anything. You can play it almost always. And even if you draw it with your command draw, it's always a shield. So excellent card. And I don't know why I wouldn't run 3 of them.
Well, I suppose the only thing I'm really curious about is because Coteaz depends on sacrificing units, why not go with, say, another Void Pirate and a couple rogue traders? Like, what's the specific appeal in Promotion? Just the fact that it is free?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's just so good. Even if you sacrifice the unit, okay, I think if you sacrifice the unit it was put on the exact same turn you played the promotion, maybe it's not worth it because it also means that you committed Coteaz to the same planet as the promoted unit, which almost never happens because that's kind of a waste. But I think even if there's just 1 turn between you playing promotion and you sacrificing the unit, I already think you got your worth out of the card because it's just so good.
Sure. Well, an attachment that is absolutely fantastic, but very, very different, is the Glavodan Eagle. It's Coteaz's signature attachment. It's 1 cost, 3 shields, unique, attached to your Warlord, who gets +1 attack, and its combat action, detach the attachment to have it become an army unit with 1 attack, 1 hit point, and the text action, return this unit to your hand. So there's all kinds of crazy tricks and shenanigans players can get up to with this card. What are some of your personal favorites? Like, how do you use the Glavodan Eagle?
my favorite use is using the combat action ability, and then using the Eagle's ability as a command stall in the next round, and then playing the Eagle for one as another command stall in the next round. That's really something. That's actually one interaction I didn't even know myself, because I thought the second ability was a combat action as well, but it isn't.
Right.
And who told me that it wasn't? Can't remember his name right now. But whoever you are and you're out there, shout out. That is amazing. And it's just, if you have enough resources that you can't spend them all anyway, it just gives you 2 free deployment stalls basically for free.
Right. And information is never a bad thing.
And that's just the fancy part. I mean, it gives your Warlord actual attack. Now you don't have to sacrifice a unit anymore to be able to attack a Void Pirate or something, which is obviously amazing. You can detach it, attack with it once, and bounce it back to your hand to shield for 3. And you can detach it and sacrifice it to Coteaz. This guy has so many angles. I don't think I could explain them all if I wanted to, because it's just so many different situations, so many different things it can do. It's just an amazing card. And it's really not that it has that one thing that is extremely powerful. It's just the entire package of versatility that makes this an incredible card that you pretty much always want to see in your games.
Well, most definitely. I suppose as we move into events, we have a grand total of 11. We see 3 copies of Preemptive Barrage. It's 1 cost, 2 shields, combat action, up to 3 Astra Militarum units you control at the same planet, all gain ranged until the very end of the phase. You mentioned that Coteaz is the best target for this. How do you typically try to get the most value out of Preemptive Barrage?
So the sick thing about Preemptive Barrage is that you don't even have to get the full value out of it. You can just target a henchman and Coteaz, and it's already going to be insane.
Right.
If you get the full 3-point Preemptive Barrage, you usually just win the fight right there. And what you can do, and what is interesting and you should consider, is if you only have 2 units at a planet, say, I don't know, an Iron Guard Recruit and a Coteaz, you can sack the Iron Guard Recruit before you play Preemptive Barrage and trigger your Formosan Black Ship to create 2 other units, and then you get the full value out of your Preemptive Barrage.
Right.
So that's neat. And most of the time, it's just a question of how you distribute the damage you're dealing with the Preemptive Barrage. Like, where does the first 3 damage go? Where do the first 3 damage go? And then where do I put the 1 damage from my token? And you have to kind of get a feeling for which units to target with which attacks. How much do I want to play around, or can I even afford to play around a route or an Indomitable? And that's just, there are a lot of layers to this card that are not apparent at the first instance. You can just run in guns blazing, but when you use it correctly, it usually ends the fight right there, because especially in the later portions of the game, if you have 2 henchmen in your entourage, then you can just target Coteaz and have 3 or even 4 different 5 attacks with the Preemptive Barrage in the ranged phase and just completely obliterate your opponent.
Sure. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. Some of the stories I've heard, I suppose just off the top of your head, do you happen to have some sort of a ballpark estimate of how much damage you've dealt during a ranged phase before, thanks to Preemptive Barrage?
I think I had a game once where I had 2 Preemptive Barrages in my hand, and at this point I'm deliberately pronouncing it like that to annoy our listeners. And I had, I think, 2 outposts and 2 henchmen, and I swung over for like 20 points of damage before my opponent could do anything.
My God.
Something ridiculous.
And I'm predicting you won that battle.
Well, he had quite the entourage as well, but nothing was left standing after that.
Well, Sounds good to me. I suppose, speaking of Cachan Outpost, next we happen to have 3 copies of the event 2 Arms. It's 0 cost, 2 shields, ready a target support card. What is your typical target for this event?
Probably Cachan Outpost. An event that costs 0 and gives a unit plus 2 attack for its next attack is well about the normal power curve, and having 2 shields to boot is just great. Like, generally, the amount of 2 shield cards in this deck makes combat very difficult for your opponent, even if you don't have resources, because 2 shield is the point. 2 shields are like at least 3 or 4 times as good as a 1 shield card, because it's very easy to play around 1 shield. You hit something that has 2 HP with a 3 cost, with a 3 attack unit, and it will kill them through 1 shield. But playing around 2 shield costs so much, because you have to expend a very good unit to kill a mediocre unit, that it's not really worth playing around the 2 shield. But when a deck has so many 2 shield cards, you're getting value just by them existing in your deck in such a great number.
Right.
And and then there are some fringe uses where you use staging ground 2 times. That hasn't actually come up in any of my games yet, I think.
Sure.
But sending a Formosan black ship can be excellent against a lot of Chimera tokens or something if you don't have a tactical squad handy.
Right, and I imagine that'll become all the more clear once we start talking about your supports, but definitely for no cost whatsoever, being able to get an additional use out of those extremely powerful, in the right situation supports, it just seems like you can't really say no to an effect like that one. I suppose next, in our sequence of events, we have 2 copies of The Emperor Protects. So it's that signature event we alluded to earlier. It's no cost, it's 1 shield. When a unit you control leaves play from a planet with your Warlord, return that unit to your hand instead. You mentioned your preference to use this alongside Eager Recruit, but what else do you do with this event?
It can be a nice backup plan for tactical squad if it gets destroyed by a Clavix War Leader or something. So if you have a staging ground in play, you can use the Emperor Protects to jump back the tactical squad, or basically any unit. I mean, it's not only for the tactical squad, but usually the tactical squad is the most important unit in that matchup. Or even if you don't have a staging ground and you need to contest the next planet, you can bring back the Cardinis and then have it at a ready for the next planet. And just constantly force your opponents to have the answers to the AoE, and once they don't have the answers anymore, you can just wipe them immediately.
Sure. I mean, it sounds absolutely perfect to me, whether you're leveraging as many ambushing units into play as possible, or it's just as much area effect as possible. It seems like either of those is an absolutely fantastic answer to our current meta, and I'm sure there are plenty of situations where it just so happens to work out that you want to return a different unit to your hand. It could be like a Coteaz's henchman. The sky is the limit. You know, there are innumerable possibilities. So it might not be a crazy, out-of-control, powerful event in every situation, but certainly in the right circumstance, it can be a pretty significant little thing. Our very last event in this deck happens to be the Emperor's Warrant. We have 3 copies, it's 2 cost. It's another 2 shield icon card. It seems like your deck is full of these. It's a combat action. Exhaust a target enemy unit at a planet without an enemy Warlord. Then deal damage equal to that unit's attack to another target unit at that planet. So what do you typically do with this?
So let me start off with a little comparison here. I think if there's no opposing Warlord present at the planet, the Emperor's Warrant is actually a better event for you to have in your hand than Archon's Terror. And that's saying a lot, because Archon's Terror is a top-notch event, probably the best event, period, in the game. Just this Warlord restriction is the only thing that keeps the Emperor's Warrant in check, in my opinion. And even then, it's a 2-shield card, so you can't go too wrong with that. What it effectively does is it routes one unit by exhausting it, and then it kills another one most of the time. And that's just, like, bonkers. basically killing a unit and then arc-stirring the other one for the same amount of resources. And it has very nice synergy with the deck in general because you can put a lot of damage on a single unit in just one ranged phase or something. So with Coteaz, if you have the signature event and you sacrifice a unit and then you have a Cachan Outpost, you're at 6 damage already. So that's a huge deterrent for your opposing Warlord to even show up to the battle. But if they don't show up, you can just Emperor's War and everything they put in there. Like they have a giant elite unit and then maybe a librarian or something.
Right.
You win that battle easily with the Emperor's War and for 2 resources.
I mean, it strikes me as fantastic because you're not banishing the unit like you would through routing. If you're exhausting it, maybe, you kill off a bit of the enemy opposition. Your remaining units can actually swing and destroy the enemy unit as opposed to having to let it return to combat during a following round by returning from that player's headquarters. It just seems like absolutely fantastic, and if you've got the resources to spare, it seems in so many situations that's just absolutely stellar. And I think you hit a fantastic point when you say that the enemy warlord often is going to be avoiding you like the plague, and if you can reliably, use this event, maybe you can save your preemptive barrage for a different occasion, or you could even use both. So it just seems like so incredibly nasty between this card.
If they show up to the planet to prevent you from playing the Warrant, you just kill the Warlord first and then use it.
Right. So. I mean, it's just absolutely stellar. I suppose just to kind of bring things to a close here, to wind this video slowly down, we have 5 supports in total, 3 different supports, the first of which we've mentioned a great many times already. It's the very popular Cachan Outpost. Its 2-cost combat action exhausts this support to give a target unit +2 attack for its next attack this phase. What is there to say about this?
This card is just excellent in this deck, because you notice our units are not particularly good at fighting. We have just a lot of small dudes who don't really do a whole lot on their own, but once you have a Cachan Outpost out, your opponent cannot ignore them anymore. You can't just go to a planet and snipe that 2/2 guy without having to fear a shield and then a backlash for attack. And once you have 2 out, your opponent basically can't stay in fights with their Warlord anymore because they're just immediately getting bloodied with their first attack.
Right.
And that's really just bringing the whole deck together. Now all of our small units can pack some punch. And it's amazing, as already mentioned, with 2 arms to get the double bonus out of it.
I mean, it just strikes me as fantastic. As soon as you have 1 on the tabletop, that 2 attack bonus could show up anywhere. You could have, hell, up to 3 copies of 2 arms in your hand, and that +2 attack bonus to a Void Pirate could suddenly become a swing of 8 or something insane like that. Maybe that's going to occur during the ranged phase. It's just such a nasty little piece of information for your opponent to think about and worry about, and just spend the rest of the game, just fretting or as a bundle of nerves and just worrying about each and every possibility. So if you're playing Coteaz without this event or without this support, I don't know what you're doing, because it just seems absurdly good.
Oh yeah, maybe I should mention that it's also a way to mitigate that problem with zero attack on Coteaz.
Right.
Because once you have a Cachan Outpost out, you can commit to that planet and have to attack for that 1 Void Pirate you want to snipe. And they can't really shield that and try to tie the planet that way, because you might just have 2 arms in hand and then they're not getting anywhere really.
Right. I mean, it's great. It's a shame. Well, I suppose it's very important for the balance of this game, for Coteaz in particular, that it's only the next individual attack, but still, it's just crazy, crazy good, and I definitely see why you would want to include 3 copies. A card of which you can only have one copy, unfortunately, is the Formosan Black Ship. It's the signature support for Torquemada. He's got 1 cost, interrupt. When you sacrifice a non-token unit, exhaust the support to put 2 guardsman tokens into play at the same planet as that sacrificed unit. I can only imagine that you're playing this almost as soon as you draw it. How do you try to get the most benefit out of this support?
The crazy thing is, I think on turn 1, depending on the planet setup, the Eagle can be better than the Black Ship sometimes.
Sure.
And sometimes even the capping unit can be better than the Black Ship if you don't want to contest the first planet. But as you said, most of the time you draw this and you play it because it turns the downside of your Warlord that you have to sacrifice a unit every time you want to attack into an actual upside, which is obviously pretty good. Now you only have upsides. And as I said, combos with 2 arms, if you want even more units on the battlefield, and just the ability to produce an army out of nowhere and always threaten that first planet, always be able to snipe the first planet and win the battle there, just so potent. And it's really, if I had to pick one card in the deck as the best card, it's pretty difficult because there are a lot of really good cards in this deck.
I'll say.
That I really like, but if I had to pick one card, I would say it's the Black Ship, because it just alters the way the game goes in such a way that now you not only have a high attack Warlord, you also have this giant force that just comes with it every time you commit to a planet, and it's very hard to deal with.
Definitely. I mean, it's just so much mental math for your opponent to juggle. If at any point you could just sacrifice a unit, all of a sudden there are 2 1/2 guardsman tokens there. They can attack. They can be, well, I suppose later rounds preemptive barraged. They're excellent fodder themselves for your Warlord to sacrifice. That all plays into Coteaz's henchman, being able to ready him, being able to allow him to sacrifice additional tokens. So it just seems like it's incredibly nasty, and it fuels so much of the synergy and combo potential inherent to this deck. So a fantastic card. I suppose our very final support, the very last card of this deck, happens to be the Staging Ground. You only include a single copy. It's 1 cost, action, exhaust this support to deploy a unit with printed cost 2 or lower at a planet. You mentioned Tactical Squad Cardinis, but why just 1 copy, and what else do you do with this support?
The thing about Staging Ground is that the first copy is pretty good. The first copy that you draw, that is.
Right.
The second copy you draw is usually questionable. It can be pretty good if you have a lot of resources and a lot of cards, but at that point you're usually winning anyway. And the third copy that you draw of Staging Ground is just atrocious. So having more than 1 copy of that in your deck means you're opening yourself up to drawing cards that are basically dead in your hand. And the deck doesn't really rely on Staging Ground, but it can be nice to have 1 copy because it makes the Kith matchup much better, because they have to be afraid of Tactical Squad Cardinis at all times. They can't just commit to a planet with everything, and because you don't have a Tactical Squad Cardinis on the battlefield, now they have to worry about what happens if he has 1 in hand. Bam, everything dies. So I think 1 copy is the right amount. It gives you this option, this possibility to draw this card and have it do cool stuff, but the deck doesn't really need it. It's just an added bonus. Let's call it that.
Right.
And I tried really hard to keep the support count as low as possible, because support cards are not what you want to draw with your command draws. What you want to draw with your command draws are cards that can impact the battle immediately from your hand, like events, attachments, via shields or effects, or the eager recruits.
Sure.
Those are the cards you want to draw. And by having too many supports in your deck, you're just diluting your deck with cards that, when you draw them, don't immediately do something, and that can cost you battles.
Well, definitely. And, I mean, Staging Ground, it's not unique, but that ability, just like you said, gets redundant and unnecessary extremely quickly. So I certainly see why you would want to include it. I can't fault you for only choosing one copy. I suppose taken all together, now that we've covered the entirety of this deck, what do you feel, just to kind of summarize, to conclude, what are some of its greatest strengths? What does it absolutely do best, potentially better than most other decks?
It makes commitment for your opponent such a nightmare, because you can always win the first planet. Like, there are a few times where this deck can't just bust in the first planet and destroy everything there is at that planet and win it. So your opponent has to always consider that. And then your opponent also has to consider they might just show up to the same planet as a Warlord and just bloody them with a Preemptive Barrage. And if your opponent has to worry about those two things, sometimes you can just snipe command and get away with it because they had to commit to the first planet in order to secure it. And when you force your opponent to make their commitment choices, to have very narrow commitment choices and base them around what you're doing, force them to adapt to your game plan, then you're doing something right, because then you have all the options, you hold all the cards, and you make the plays. And that's really what's important in tournament play, I feel, because once you're in a position where you're making the plays, you have the control of the game, and even if you have a suboptimal hand, you can parlay that into a win over the course of a longer game, or what's the term for a game that's not long but not short? Like
Moderate, medium?
Yeah, of medium length. Yeah, that's probably it.
Sure. Well, I suppose if someone is going up against a deck like this, there are combos all over the place. They feel corralled and forced by their opponent into committing to this planet or that planet. It seems like they're always being preemptive barraged apart. What exactly are some of the weaknesses of this deck? What are some of the flaws that an opponent can try to exploit or take advantage of?
Pretty good against this deck is Indomitable, and drawing your third Indomitable, and then having Iron Halo on your Warlord. That's pretty nasty to deal with, because those effectively turn off your high attack strength, and now you have to rely on your smaller dudes to do stuff, and you can't overcommit on one Cachan Outpost. But when you start distributing the Cachan Outpost triggers on multiple units, now their shield cards get much more advantageous for them, because they can actually shield your attacks. So Space Marines are a good place to start if you want to combat this deck. And then, I mean, you can always lose to Kith. If they get the chokehold on you and you don't draw any of your intrinsic deck draw, you're always going to be in trouble. And there's no deck that can just outright beat Kith. Another deck that this deck is actually not the best against is Orcs, because they have a lot of units that just come with a lot of HP.
Right.
So it's difficult to shoot them down, and that can prove to be a problem. Fortunately, Orcs are not very good otherwise, so you can kind of ignore them in the meta.
Right. Well, they're definitely a bit of a non-presence at the moment. I suppose just before we end up bringing this video to a close, any final words of wisdom, any pieces of advice you'd like to share for players prospectively running this deck? Any just final pieces of advice or suggestions?
I think what this whole thing taught me is that you have to always question your ally choices. Like, don't be satisfied with your deck as it is. After every game, ask yourself, would it have been better if I had run another ally? Because this is basically how I arrived at this deck. I questioned my Orc ally choice. I made a couple of changes. I switched to Space Marine, and I realized, well, this deck is much better than it was before. And don't just play Kato with Tau. Try Esper Militarum as allies, for example. And don't just play always Zerathur with Orc. Play a couple of games with Dark Elder every now and then. And just try to get a feeling for each ally and expand your horizon and your gameplay horizon with this. And I think that's a very, very valuable lesson to be taken away from this.
Sure, don't be afraid to experiment, to deviate from the norm, or to play something other than what the meta is telling you is very strong. So just try new things, experiment with new combos. Sounds like this deck has been a fantastic learning experience for you, and it seems like you've done exceptionally well with it so far. So I suppose with all that said, thank you so much for coming on today. I very much appreciate your time and putting up a deck list for probably an underplayed but still exceptionally powerful Warlord. So unless there's anything else you'd like to say, thank you once again, and have an absolutely fantastic evening.
One thing I'd like to add is you can check out the deck list on CardGameDB.
Sure.
You can link that under the video.
Definitely will.
And I linked the video under the deck list, so it's a win-win for both sides. And thanks for having me on, and let me talk about this deck.
Not a problem. You're welcome back anytime. I'd love to record a game with this deck in action, played by a competent, capable player such as yourself. So thanks, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
Yeah.
Well, with our deck deconstruction having drawn to a close, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you once again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this deck-centric analysis and discussion. Please leave a comment sharing your own thoughts and opinion regarding not just this Torquemada Coteaz deck list, but also your suggestions regarding this deck deconstruction series as a whole. The goal was to remain concise but stay ever informative, and with less emphasis on video editing, I should be able to produce many additional entries in this series relative to other videos fairly quickly. But whether you liked this concept or found it ultimately flawed, interaction with viewers like you remains the highlight of this and all projects, and I look forward to comments and feedback. Plus, if you have a deck list you'd potentially like featured in a future video of your own, you're encouraged to get in touch. But with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already. If you are already subscribed, you're encouraged to share this content, as the more eyes there are on this video, the more potential new players we might draw to this game, and as a result, ever expand our Conquest community. Please feel free to contact me directly or keep in touch through Twitter or Facebook, and if so inclined, I'd be honored by your visiting my Patreon. But in any case, thank you once again for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.